Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
A terrible start to the season continued for Manchester United when they came away 4-0 losers at Brentford. Brentford won thanks to goals by Ben Mee, Jensen, Da Silva and Mbeumo, with the XG showing that whilst it was a deserved win for Brentford, they were highly clinical whilst United was slightly wasteful. In this video we'll look at the tactical reasons behind this loss. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Here's how both teams lined up courtesy of the OneFootball app. As you can see, Ten Hag didn't change too much from the first match of the season, whilst Brentford, much like Brighton last week, lined up with a back three as well. To get lineups like this, stats, formations and anything your footballing heart could need, check out the OneFootball app for absolutely free through the link in the description below. But let's start by looking at United in possession and how Brentford was so effective out of possession. United's problems in possession usually began from goal kicks. Their general setup would look like this. Martinez and Maguire would split either side of De Gea, whilst Eriksen was the sole pivot, looking to provide an option into the midfield. Brentford in these situations were extremely high pressing, with Tony and Mbeumo ready to press the centre-backs, whilst Jensen had the responsibility of looking to tie up Eriksen throughout the match. The remaining pivots could then become a double pivot, picking up the midfielders. It's also important to note that Brentford were aggressive with their wing-backs. If they were being more reactive, they could have chosen to have these cover the United wingers, but instead, by being aggressive, they were looking to cover the United fullbacks instead. So in these deep situations, United do technically have a 3 versus 2 advantage in terms of numbers, but the problem is De Gea cannot play with the ball at his feet at all. As a result, they cannot take advantage of this situation. That's why possession teams who like to play the way Ten Hag plays have a goalkeeper who's excellent on the ball, because they can actually make the difference in these situations. So the team in possession will always effectively have an 11 versus 10 situation, as the keeper cannot exactly join in the press. But as De Gea was so poor on the ball, after covering a centre-back, one of the Brentford centre-forwards could then look to apply pressure on De Gea. Initially, the easy space is out towards the fullbacks, but as discussed, the wing-backs for Brentford were highly attacking, so as soon as De Gea would look to go wide, they would spring forward and press the fullback. And if possible, Brentford didn't want to isolate their wide centre-back against a winger, so the wing-back could look to use their cover shadow instead, and a forward would come across to apply the pressure whilst looking to cut off this passing lane at the same time, making it difficult for United to escape that region. So this is the general United shape consisting of a back three to start off with. But you can see that Brentford are happy to be highly aggressive with their forwards who would look to press the United back three. Jensen was always looking to tie up Eriksen to cover the central pass, meaning that the space was usually with the United fullbacks on either side. Running this on, we can see that the Brighton forward cuts out this lateral pass while still applying pressure on De Gea, and De Gea looks to go out wide to Shaw. Mbeumo from centre forward can then look to apply pressure on Shaw whilst also looking to cut out that passing option. And this means that Hickey doesn't have to be as aggressive in committing to the press, as he can still use his cover shadow to keep an eye on Rashford behind him. But as a non-ball playing goalkeeper, De Gea also doesn't have the best decision making. As a result, Eriksen was always looking to provide an option, but Jensen would sit on him for the whole game. But De Gea would still look to make these riskier passes into Eriksen, and with his back to goal and under pressure, his only option would be to play backwards or to look for a blinder pass into one of his wider men. This led to several problems for United and even culminated in conceding a goal. It's the same build-up shape for United with a back three and the Brentford front two looking to apply pressure. Instead of going wide this time, as Hickey is already looking to apply pressure, De Gea has opted for the central pass into Eriksen, who's dropping as the sole pivot. But throughout the game, Jensen was consistently applying pressure on Eriksen, so he cannot turn, meaning that his only option is either to play backwards or to look for a blind pass around the corner to a teammate. In this instance, he goes back to Maguire and Jensen continues his press, meaning he's able to block this clearance and Brentford have a throw in this region. And resulting from that throw, they actually scored their first goal. For Brentford's second, the problems are obvious. Again, United line up in a back three, and the Brentford front two are looking to press the three. It is also quite clear to see that Eriksen is under pressure and this is not a good pass. Again, keepers who are better with the ball at their feet will be able to find their United midfielders who are higher up, but this isn't the case here. Despite Eriksen clearly being under pressure, De Gea still attempts the short pass into him. Jensen is able to rob the ball from Eriksson, and he finishes expertly. So as the game went on, United became more tentative in looking to start off short, which meant that De Gea was more likely to go long, but again his passing range is not great, so when he did go long, rather than being a long pass, it was more like a long ball. And in open play, United had similar structural problems as they did last week against Brighton. Last week, McTominay and Fred started, and neither are great on the ball, so they struggled in this single pivot position. As a result, Eriksson is great on the ball, so Ten Hag opted to use him as the deepest pivot, and pushed once again Fred and Fernandes much higher. So once again there was a lot of weight placed on the single pivot to do all of the ball progression if they did build through the centre. And this Brentford midfield 3 would switch from a flat 3 to become more of a 2 and a 1, and again, Jensen was like Eriksson's shadow, following him around the pitch and making it difficult for United to play through the pivot. And when United had the ball deep on the pitch, for the most part, Luke Shaw did stay wide. For the majority of the first half, this was the structure, but when we saw Ten Hag switch to a double pivot, they had much more success. One of the moments where we saw this was when Fernandes dropped deep to momentarily be the second pivot alongside Eriksson. So when Fernandes received the ball, this would draw Jensen towards him, and then he could then find Eriksson in a little bit of space. If this drew an extra midfielder, there was now potential to pass to a man higher up. But this didn't happen often during the first half. Another structure that Ten Hag opted for was pushing Shaw higher and having Dalot as the third centre back. This would mean if Brentford forwards were still pressing man to man, there would be an easy outlet here, as the wing back was more reluctant to press in centrally rather than pressing a fullback who was in their usual position. United are using a traditional back four in the build-up. Eriksson once again is the sole isolated pivot. Jensen is already committed to pressing him as he had been throughout the match. But in this instance, Fernandes has momentarily dropped deeper, almost like a second pivot alongside Eriksson, so now Jensen has two men to think about. Jensen is then drawn towards Fernandes, who can find Eriksson in space for once. And now the structure of the Brentford midfield for once is not ideal, and Eriksson is able to find Fred between the lines in space, although he doesn't make the most of it. The Brentford front two are defending narrowly as Jensen is deeper, so they're looking to cut out the pivot. Here, Dalot has opted to stay deeper, so it is a makeshift back three, meaning that he is able to receive outside the initial pressure and then look to drive forward. But we also know that Ten Hag doesn't mind an inverted fullback, and often it is Luke Shaw. And when he did tuck in to receive the ball, Jensen's priority was still on Eriksson, so Hickey, who had initially been covering him when he was fullback, could be drawn more infield, looking to cover Shaw. This subsequently creates space out wide. Occasionally, Fred would move out there, but for the most part this was an opportunity to find Rashford isolated against the centre-back. And it is important to give Brentford credit, as their centre-backs were quick to shift across towards the wide men when these situations did occur. But much like last week, in these isolated situations, neither Rashford nor Sancho were at their very best, so they couldn't get past the centre-backs into more dangerous zones. Here, Luke Shaw is in a slightly more tucked in position, and Hickey has come from wing-back, looking to press his man. So now when Shaw finds Rashford, there is this situation which is ideal for United. A skillful winger 1 versus 1 against a centre-back. However, he's unable to use his dribbling or his pace to get into this dangerous position to make anything happen. So for Ten Hag, the goal of having a single dedicated midfield pivot is to allow the others to move much higher up the pitch and be between the lines, hopefully to be able to combine and lead to shots on goal. However, United's link-up play between the lines when they were found wasn't great, and often the midfielders weren't found as often as he would like, meaning that Fernandes, who's a highly on-the-ball midfielder, was less involved chance creation, especially in the first half. And credit must be given to Brentford for making this happen. The wingbacks who were previously aggressive would now shift into a more traditional back five shape. This would mean that the three central men would now be covered man to man. In addition, this 2-1 structure would now once again switch to a more flat 3, allowing the half-space men to be covered from behind, as well as having a man with the cover shadow, making it so hard to find a man between the lines in the first place. Add to this Tony and Mbeumo being willing to drop deep, and this shape became even more solid. The Brentford centre forwards are disciplined and have come deep to help with the defence. But the discipline of the midfield 3 now becoming flat is much more impressive, as now it's the forwards who are covering Eriksson, allowing Jensen to drop in and create the back 3. So now, the men between the lines for United are covered from in front as well as from behind. Ten Hag looked for his centre-backs to then become more involved in the play, pushing them higher up the pitch, which would then allow the likes of Eriksen to also look to find space higher up. One of the goals of this may have been to try and draw a forward to create more space higher up the pitch so that difference makers like Eriksen, Fernandes and Ronaldo could then be found. Staying compact would also make it potentially easier for United to counter-press when necessary. However, when Brentford did get the ball, they weren't looking to start a possession phase. Instead, both Tony and Mbeumo, from deep turnovers, as well as even higher up the pitch, as soon as Brentford got the ball, would be looking to make runs in behind the vacated areas, particularly behind Shaw, who may have inverted, creating even more space out wide. And this even leads to a goal for Brentford. This particular scenario doesn't lead to a goal, but it shows the general principle, with Luke Shaw having pushed higher up. You can see that Mbeumo is positioned behind Shaw, so as soon as the possibility arises, he looks to make a run into that region. And the pass does come in, drawing Martinez out of position, and Mbeumo is able to get on the ball and pass Martinez, however he can't keep it in play. But this was just a warning sign. For the goal, you can see the players Ten Hag is willing to commit, as we have Luke Shaw inverting, as well as the men who had been between the lines. In this scenario, Rashford has also come in central, meaning that Eriksen is the only deep midfielder. Maguire is also high up the pitch, as is Martinez somewhere out here. So when there is a turnover, Maguire is still high and Shaw is looking to recover from his inverted position, but you can see that now Martinez is isolated. Tony plays the perfect pass that Mbeumo gets on the end of, and he is able to finish. So let's touch on a couple of things that Brentford did when they were in more controlled possession. Brentford definitely had a look at Brighton's homework for their possession phases, and also knowing that Ten Hag likes his team to press, they weren't interested in beginning a possession phase and instead wanted to play over the press. This shows as their keeper attempted the most passes for them with 39, and 36 of those 39 were long balls. This was helped by the fact that they had a front two, where many teams instead play with one centre forward. In addition, it was obvious from the get-go they were targeting Lisandro Martinez, who may not be the best in the air. So, the long ball would come, whilst the second forward would look to make the run in behind. And crucially, they were also looking to get numbers around the ball to try and win a second ball if it was knocked back. So United are in a position where they would potentially be able to press effectively. But Brentford know this, so they're willing to go long immediately. You can see that Martinez has been targeted, and Brentford's second forward was always then looking to make a run into the space, whilst numbers would look to gather around for the second ball. Overall, this game shows that Ten Hag doesn't have the players that's needed for his style of play, so United need to make a decision, and either get him the players he needs to implement this possession style, or ask Ten Hag to find a way to adapt his style, which is not ideal when you've just hired a new manager. On the tactical score, Thomas Frank earns a 10, having studied United carefully and exploited many of their weaknesses. It's tough to judge Ten Hag because he simply doesn't have the players he needs or the style that he likes, but he still gets a 2 out of 10 for this match. What are your scores? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.